All right, what's up, New York? How's it going? I'm Ross Facaturo, bringing you guys the 64th episode of the Apples to Apples podcast. And while we kind of touched on the baseball towards the end of last episode, we have now completed this year's Subway Series. You had the three out at Yankee early on in the year, just had the final three at Citi Field this past weekend. And while we got a couple more series left before the league-wide All-Star break, we kind of got I guess you want to say, well, we'll recap the first half once we get to the All Star break. But as far as like these two teams' recent stretches, they're both over 500, significantly over 500 at that. But the way these two teams have been playing these last couple weeks, you would not know that despite the record. We'll start off with a Met team that did get 2 out of 3 this past weekend. You're looking at a season series, by the way, split down the middle 3-3. Both teams taking the majority on their home field in this past weekend. The Mets taking the first 2 of the 3 before losing the Sunday afternoon game. But, you look back at Friday's game, right? Which, by the way, not really the cream of the crop in terms of pitching talent, aside from Max Fried in Sunday's game. Besides that, I mean, you're looking at Marcus Stroman, Carlos Rodon on the Yankee side of things. Stroman coming back from the lengthy injury. Rodon's having the best year, in terms of his career as a Yankee, but that doesn't say much given how catastrophic the first 2 went for Rodon in the Bronx. And for the Mets, 2 bullpen games and a Frankie Montas that admitted to tipping pitches in his prior start, which was his second of the year in mid-June. So you really weren't getting, Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, and John Smoltz. You know what I'm talking about? So right off the bat, you're looking at teams that are coming into this series, in the dumps, losing left and right. The Mets just got their teeth kicked in and some in Pittsburgh. Legitimately the worst series, at least 3-game series, but I think overall series 3 games, 4 games, it don't matter. The Mets played their worst series in terms of run differential in the history of their franchise. And that's talking about the 62 Mets, everything. The Mickey Callaway days, everything, bro. The Mets had not played a worse 3-game set than the series they lost by a score of 30 runs to 4 at PNC Park in Pittsburgh, which is remarkable. I'm talking about Mickey Callaway, the 62 Mets, essentially every year besides 1969 and 1986, something went south for the Mets. And yet, through all of that, they had never played a series worse than the 3 games they just played in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is unbelievable. But then, you follow that up the Milwaukee series, you wind up winning the doubleheader. Ironically, the team that looked like they got the Mets out of their offensive rut, for the time being at least, was Jacob Misiorowski, who going into that start was riding like a 1.3 ERA and striking out every other batter he faced. But that's how baseball goes, right? And for a Yankee team, I mean, they had just gotten swept. Talk about remarkable history being made. Hard to believe that prior to this past series with the Yankees up north in Toronto, they had never been swept by the Toronto Blue Jays, at least in Toronto, until this past week. And now you're looking at, well, both teams now, but for the Yankees, aside from, I mean, I don't think they've not been in first place all year up until now. Because you got to go back talking about the Brewers. Remember, like that 2-week phase with the torpedo bats and all that, right? Jazz Chisholm's bat with the lump in the barrel of the bat, and everybody was talking about you're looking at 20-4 finals, 25-3, et cetera, et cetera. Offense through the roof, and you're looking at the way the bats are shaped. They had like a whole scouting report, everything saying they were manufacturing the bats differently. But regardless, I don't think the Yankees have been outside of first place because of that hot start. They were like 5-0. Swept Milwaukee. I forgot the next series, but I think they either swept that one too, or they won 2 or 3. I don't think they've been outside of first place until now. With Toronto ahead of them, and now the Rays, hustling and tussling back and forth with them. A handful of games behind Toronto, both of them. And for the Mets, I mean, it's kind of been a tug of war with them in Philly as well. They kind of had the chokehold of the division for a little bit, but, when you drop, what was it? They got swept by Tampa. They took one against Philly. They think they got swept in Atlanta too. Yeah, because they blew that game late. That was that was Ozuna hit the bases clear and double down in Truist, which is kind of the thing too. I mean, look, the Braves notorious vet killers, right? I mean, Chipper Jones named his kid Shea. You go down the list, right? The Dansby Swanson homer in 22, the whole NL East is over type deal. The Braves have had the Mets number and some. There's no doubt about it. And if you want to you want to talk about one of the most historic franchises in the league, one of the most well-ran organizations in the league, it's not like you're getting beat by a bottom dweller year after year. But on the same token, how if you want to tell me, look, the Braves, one of the most historic organizations in the league, one of the most well-ran organizations in the league, division rival. How many years have they gone back and forth, meaningful pennant races, division races, wild card races, etc. That's fine. You're talking about the Pittsburgh Pirates, who, in recent memory, we got to look back to 2015 to talk about how electric that park is when they're playing postseason ball. We got to go back, more than a decade. All the jokes and stories made up about how Paul Skeens is the new DeGrom, how his career is being wasted every, ticking second. But how come the Pittsburgh Pirates, really no like rival association with the Mets, different division? They really haven't had memorable playoff matchups, if any, in recent memory. How come? And a Pittsburgh team that is year in, year out a joke. They don't spend money, right? We got to go back to 2014, 2015 to talk about how electric their ballpark is come postseason baseball, because it's been so long since they've seen postseason baseball, right? Everybody talking about Paul Skeens being the new DeGrom, and not in a good way. He'll put up 8 scoreless innings and then lose the game 1-0. So how come whenever the Mets go into PNC Park, more often than not, they lose the series? And in this year specifically, in years past, I mean, you look back, what was it, the Taijuan Walker, Luis Rojas game where you had them like hit a bases clear and RBI bunt single. I think that same year was the year the All-Star break was sandwiched in between series with Pittsburgh, and they lost both of them. That derailed the season. I mean, what is it? One of the most obscure teams, talking about Pittsburgh, one of the most irrelevant teams to be a reoccurring, fork in the road for the New York Mets. You know what I mean? Like the Braves are going to cross paths with them, but the Pirates are just out there. It's not like they're ever good while they're doing it. And just year after year after year, despite the Mets record and the Pirates record, when the Mets walk into Pittsburgh, 9 times out of 10, they're losing the series. And let's say 6 times out of 10, they're getting swept in that series in humiliating fashion. And for whatever reason, it was exhibit A this season. So, but they've won a series since, 2 series since, and now they got the Orioles and the Royals, both of which they're on the road for to close out the first half of the year. And I just think when you look at, let's just like generalize the first half as a whole. Pitching for the first half of it, phenomenal. And it looked like just a carbon copy of how they rode the magic carpet ride, and it just kind of looked like a carbon copy of the, and it just kind of looked like a carbon copy of the magic carpet ride that they rode somehow for the entire season. And it looked like kind of what it became this year. We're just slowly but surely, one pitcher after the next, whether it be an injury or poor performance, all of a sudden now said magic carpet ride is finito. It's done. But last year, it felt like it never hit that part, that part of the ride. And for it now to kind of, shows true colors, you're looking at guys like Griffith Canning, who, obviously with him going down with the injury, it's a little different. But Paul Blackburn, Clay Holmes all of a sudden could, barely go 5 innings, could barely ever see the 6th inning. Last year you didn't really have to worry about that with Minaya and Quintana and Severino. I'm not saying they were in the Cy Young race for the entire season without, any blips in the road, but Minaya, aside from the occasional bad start or two, was locked down the whole year. Quintana, the numbers weren't jumping off the page, but you knew you were going to get a serviceable start out of him. Severino Severino was probably the biggest concern. What everybody's talking about with Frankie Montas this year, Severino was everything and some last year, and it worked out pretty damn well with him. Not so much this year with him in Sacramento, and there's a chance, well, it's all but a certainty he's going to get moved. Who knows if he gets moved back to Queens? That would be something to keep an eye on. But just overall, I mean, you kind of, those are the three names to list. And if you want to talk about, they kept Minaya, whereas Severino and Quintana, they let walk. Quintana, for whatever reason, Quintana was a free agent until like mid to late February. They had every chance to bring back Quintana. And for whatever reason, they didn't. And he's been pretty damn good in Milwaukee. And I brought up before, Severino's been a nightmare in Oakland, and he got paid right away, basically. So much so the Athletics made him their highest earning contract in franchise history. And, just talk about the Pirates and being cheap. Oakland knows every which way of being cheap in the MLB. But now suddenly, when you're looking at a rotation that is, 2-3 people pretty much? Because Minaya, Senga are hurt. McGill is, I think, hurt, but he also sucks. Canning's done for the year. Your rotation pretty much is basically David Peterson and Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes. 3-man rotation, one of which was a reliever this time last year. The other one just got back on a mound 3 weeks ago, and David Peterson is pretty much the lone exception. That if this guy takes the mound, I'm pretty confident I'm going to get a good outing. That's not even a knock on Clay or Montas. Clay, who has been, he's had some shaky outings lately, but for the most part, I think it would be safe to say his transition from being a reliever to a starter could be a lot worse. A lot worse. And Montas, I mean, everybody was grilling the guy. And I just said Severino's situation last year felt very similar. The money that Montas got paid is pretty much the money Severino, they gave to Severino last year. For whatever reason, I don't know. Maybe it's because of the way their Yankee tenures finished, but as good as Severino was as a Yankee, his tenure was, or the end of his tenure was awful. He couldn't see the third inning without getting booed on most nights. And Montas was there obviously a lot less longer. I think he played half a season, and he was forgettable. So maybe there's a little bit of that to it. But aside from that, I mean, if anything, the season Montas came off of before becoming a Met was a lot more promising than the one Sevy came off of. Talking about, with Montas last year, starting with the Reds, getting traded in Milwaukee at the deadline, whereas I just brought up Severino was borderline unusable in his final year as a Yank. So, when you look at the pitching and all the numbers, the bullpen numbers, talking about, I think they had the lowest team ERA in terms of the bullpen, or it might have been the whole pitching staff, but definitely the bullpen at least, of every team in the majors. Flash forward now, July 8th, I think they are dead last. I think they are dead last. At the pitching in that skid was so bad, it was a complete 180 from 1 to 30, which is remarkable. And the hitting has been, I don't know if awful might be too strong, but the same old concerns with runners in scoring position, runners on base, period. Juan Soto, as good as his numbers became, especially even during the dry patch, the dry spell, his numbers got better somehow. But even then, his numbers with the runners in scoring position are still dreadful compared to years past, and just overall. Lindor's numbers are down. Pete, his start to the year was incredible. It's still been pretty damn good, but just Nimmo, you like the big time hitters. Forget even the baby Mets. We get to them in a second because they're all a joke. That there is not one guy that's successfully hitting with runners on base. And that's got to fall on Chavez, the hitting coach. I don't know how he survived this because this has been a reoccurring multi-year thing. You brought in the guy you paid $50 million plus per year, and as good as his numbers, like I said, they've heated up now. Everybody's talking about him being an all-star snub, and numbers-wise, they're probably got a point. As disappointing as this year's been, just compared to some other guys, the numbers with the runners in scoring position are just still not there. And that's why I think the concern with the losing streak is, it's almost become a given that the bats aren't going to show up. So with the fact that the pitching was so damn good, so damn unhittable a start that they were winning games because of it, all of a sudden the pitching comes back down to earth. The hitting shows no signs of improving. And all of a sudden, now the one reason why you were winning games is not carrying the load. So nobody will. And that's going to be a problem, man, because, not only is the pitching look underwhelming for any team with playoff slash World Series aspirations, but, let alone to rely on them to win you games is absurd. And it's just flat out not going to happen. Because you look at, pitching staffs in recent years, right? The Dodgers, they had injuries. They still had Yamamoto. They traded for Flaherty. You had Trinan closing the games. They, obviously Walker Buehler had a solid comeback here. Before that, Nathan Eovaldi, big time pickup for the Rangers that first offseason. They had Jose Leclerc. I remember Josh Spores, a couple other guys. The Mets got, and the bullpen, forget it. I was talking about, 1 to 30, but even guys like Reed Garrett, this is now the second year in a row where he had some of the best reliever numbers in the whole entire MLB for the first few weeks, and now you can't ask for one inning without at least an earned run. Brazaban's turned into a total pumpkin. Who else? Buto going on the IR now. He was like one of the Diaz, besides Diaz, who's been great. Buto felt like one of the other few reliable ones. I mean, Daniel Nunez is going to have Tommy John. Losing Minter right out of the gates was killer. And just overall, I mean, now you got the guy Dickie Lovelady coming in. He's a nightmare. So the hitting has been a problem all year. No signs of it improving. Pitching was great to start the year. Every sign of it declining has appeared. And the fact that you were relying on the pitching staff out of goodwill to win you postseason games and beyond was absurd, and it's finally starting to come to light. So for the Mets, like I said, they just won their last two series, so it's not as much of a pushing the panic button, but big picture, you're looking at a Baltimore team, Kansas City team that are probably 1A, 1B, along with Cleveland, a couple other teams, Atlanta. I guess you want to put Arizona there too. Some of the most disappointing teams in the league this season. Baltimore, Kansas City was just a postseason matchup. Neither one would be in the postseason as we speak. And I guess you want to do a little bit of an AL segue. I want to keep the episodes to like 20, 25 minutes. But we'll get into the Yankees here. The Yankees are losing too, man. I just told you the Blue Jays leapfrogged them. First time Toronto swept them in a season series, or at least I think it was 4 games set. And similar things too, man. The offensive production is not there aside from like Jazz Chisholm. Judge is, look, you're not gonna. It's a tough ask to ask for a homer at 5 RBIs every game. Judge ain't gonna hit 162 homers, but also you gotta see a resemblance to the elite offensive production, and it hadn't been there. Like the Boston series, I think he went like 0 for 10, 7 strikeouts or something. He had one hit, was the homer off Crochet in the 9th. Other than that, he didn't have another hit the whole series. Right? They dropped 2 or 3 against the Athletics. Clark Schmidt starting one of those games now is going to need Tommy John. Add him to the list with Garrett Cole. The rotation, like I said, to preface all this, Stroman ain't scaring anybody. Carlos Rodon looks solid to start the year, but all of a sudden he's back, coming back to earth in terms of his career as a Yankee. So who you got? I mean, Max Fried's been great. Legitimate Cy Young case in the AL. Will Warren has been a nice surprise. But other than that, I mean, who's really your pitching staff there? And a lineup that, look, Anthony Volpe is public enemy number 1. I feel like aside from the whole, Paisano next Jeter motto that he's been trying to live by, if he was just some Joe Schmo they picked up off the Rule 5, his ass would be in Double-A at this point. And he was a top prospect, I get it. And he ain't the only former number 1 MLB prospect in this town that's pissing people off because, well, the other one got sent down. But Volpe's getting killed, man. He can't hit. He can't field. He can't do anything right now. He almost knocked out Aaron Judge throwing the ball back after an inning ended. I don't know if you guys saw that clip. Everything that could go wrong right now for Anthony Volpe is going wrong. On the plus side, Jason Dominguez has been a nice surprise. He's been hitting the ball a little bit lately, but divided fan base you got going on with the manager seems to be benching him every 3 games or so. I mean, he got benched this past in the Sunday game that the Yankees wound up winning, but a day prior to an off day, a scheduled off day where you had Dominguez and Jazz Chisholm off the bench, arguably the Yankees' 2 best hitters right now. And, DJ LeMahieu has been one of the go-to guys to point the finger to for like the past 5 years. Nothing different with that. Stanton back from the IR stint hasn't really done much, but it's obviously, you got to kind of hold out. Judge puts up the numbers regular season, Stanton in the playoffs. I'm not saying you want your DH batting under the Mendoza line with the, the save of grace of, all right, well, he'll manage to cover off the ball come October. I'm not saying you want that out of your cleanup hitter, no less, but, and he just came back from the IR stint, so maybe there's a little bit of an adjustment period there. Just overall, man, I feel like the Yankees, I don't know, I can't put a finger on what their issue is. Just a hell of a lot of losing. When you got one or two bats going, 1 or 2 pitchers going too, and talking about the bullpen, Devin Williams kind of coming back to form, but all of a sudden Luke Weaver looks like a shell of himself. Kind of looks like the Luke Weaver that traveled half the league before he got, picked up by the Yankees as like the latest, late bloomer type reliever. Cough, cough. We brought up his name before in Clay Holmes. All of a sudden Luke Weaver's, getting rocked every other outing. So Yankees really got nothing going for them right now. They got 3 against Seattle, 3 against the Cubs to round out the first half of the year, both series in the Bronx. 2 premier teams. I'm talking about the Mets, their final 2 teams, underachievers. Mariners, Cubs, arguably overachievers. You got, obviously, the Mariners, Cal Raleigh, big dumper behind the plate. If it weren't for Judge, he'd probably be the front runner for the MVP in the AL, and there's honestly a chance to be made, or an argument to be made, that he's still the front runner despite it. It's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. And for the Cubs, Seiya Suzuki leads the league in RBIs. PCA, the story he's been. Kyle Tucker, they brought in the offseason. At Carson Kelly, a little bit of a resurgence too. Really quick though, I want to make this point, and maybe I'll clip this for the socials or whatever. The All-Star game coming up. People are talking about the ballots, and if you look closely at who's starting in center field for both leagues, starting in center field, forget, just being on the roster in the first place. For the American League, it's Detroit Tigers center fielder Javier Baez. And for the National League, it's Cubs center fielder Pete Crow Armstrong. And obviously, a lot of people have been kicking the Mets because of that trade in 2021 that sent Pete Crow Armstrong to the Cubs for Trevor Williams and Javier Baez. And that's a season that the Mets wound up missing the postseason. Once the season ended, they weren't even in a postseason spot when they made the trade at the deadline, nor were they close. And this is a Jacob deGrom that had just gotten shut down with a major injury. Now, all these years later, Baez is tearing the cover off the ball with Detroit, and obviously Pete Crow Armstrong's become one of the best stories in the league in terms of one of the next potential, superstars that the MLB has to offer. A lot of people have been knocking the Mets for it. Not only giving up, PCA at such a young age, not even really giving him a chance in the organization, but also only having Javier Baez for half a season. But here's where I'll say this: you could do the old Mets gonna Met, LOL Mets, any which way you want. There is no lack of opportunities to laugh at the Mets historically. Now, you name it. I don't think you could do it here, and I'll tell you why. And we could look at both for 2 different reasons. For the Baez situation, are we just going to ignore Javier Baez's first 3 seasons in Detroit when he signed that contract in the 2022 offseason? I mean, he wasn't just only, underwhelming. He was borderline unplayable. So much so I think the Tigers had him coming off the bench for a better part of last season. And he was looking like legitimately one of the worst contracts in the entire league. We're talking about being compared to Anthony Rendon, Chris Bryant level bad. Now, and this isn't 1 season. This is 3 full seasons where he was borderline unplayable. Now, there's no doubting his numbers, obviously, to start this season. He's been terrific. He's been what the Tigers thought they were getting when they signed him, and he's doing it as a center fielder, no less. He completely changed positions. So credit to what he's doing this year. But the fact that we're just going to ignore what he did for 3 full seasons prior to this season is absurd. And then for PCA, I'll say this. Francisco Alvarez, former number 1 prospect in the entire MLB, is currently playing in AAA. Brett Beatty, year after year after year, talked about as being the future at the hot corner or a primary potential trade piece. He has been hitting 7th or 8th for the better part of this season, and for most of it has been just a rollover, ground out machine. Mark Vientos currently holds the record for most RBI. Mark Vientos currently holds the records for Mark Vientos, who holds the Met record for most RBIs in a single postseason, is an automatic out and couldn't field the goddamn beach ball. Ronnie Mauricio is still being shown highlights of one swing from 2 years ago. He's been on the team for a month now. Luis Angel Acuna was formerly a top prospect in the Rangers system, got moved over here in the Max Scherzer trade, and aside from being a go-to pinch runner, has also now found his ass on the bench in Syracuse. What I'm getting at is not a single one of these baby Met, homegrown Met prospects, you name it, whatever nickname you want. Currently, as I'm sitting here recording this season, they're going 0 for 5 on all 5 of them. So please tell me how Pete Crow Armstrong would have been any different. In this organization, you could have had Mike Trout, Ken Griffey Jr., and Andrew Jones playing for the Syracuse Mets on the come up, waiting to get called up to Flushing, and I'd bet you dollars to donuts that they'd go 0 for 3 on those 3 too. For whatever reason, Pete Alonso, I mean, damn, it's like he escaped with his life. Same with Nimmo. I can't believe those 2 panned out. Every single Met, legitimate, highly touted top prospect the Mets have had in recent years has been underwhelming or flat out a failure. I mean, I'm talking, and I'll hold my breath for, like look at Vientos last year, was great. He was also a DH. I mean, the fielding thing is nothing new in terms of being a problem. It's the hitting. People are talking about sophomore slump, comparing him to Corbin Carroll. Difference is when Corbin Carroll wasn't hitting, he was still a 5-tool player everywhere else. He was running the bases like the damn Flash. He was a web gem left and right. Vientos can't field, period, so he's an automatic DH, and if he ain't hitting, what is he good for? Alvarez, the one saving grace was the defense, and he was a wild pitch machine, pass ball machine. Was a big part of losing them that game in Atlanta. It's not just that he can't hit, he can't do anything right. So all of us, you go down the list, Beatty, Mauricio, none of these guys are panning out. So why are you going to sit here and tell me that if the Mets kept Pete Crow Armstrong, he wouldn't just be, Travis Jankowski with a longer last name, with 2 last names? So just in short, I don't think the Mets missed the last 3 years of Javier Baez prior to this season. If anything, if we signed him to the past 3 years, we would have been the ones getting laughed at for that. And for Pete Crow Armstrong, he's the anomaly in terms of, giving up highly touted prospects when you have a need. I'd say the one thing that you could fairly critique the Mets for is making a buying like trade in that scenario where you're like 5 games back at the deadline. I don't know if you buy, if you're in the buyer's market. That's the one thing I'd say. But in terms of both players who are going to be starting the All-Star game, you got to put some Met context into it. They would not be, performing at this level had they still been wearing New York Met uniforms. Baez for sure, just solely off of numbers from the past 3 years. PCA more of a hypothetical, but going off of every other, highly touted Met prospect hitter in the last couple of years, I don't know if he'd still be the one anomaly. So I tried to get that off my chest. Look, you're going to get every chance you want to LOL Met, LMFAO Met, Met gonna Met you want. There's going to be no lack of chances to laugh at the Mets, but I think this one's a little fugazi. That's going to be it from me, guys. Don't want this episode to go too long. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, my promo code Apples to Apples on SeatGeek. If you got any games coming up on the agenda, concerts you want to hit up this summer, use the SeatGeek app. Use my code Apples to Apples. It's going to save you 20% off your first purchase using the SeatGeek app. Once again, the code is apples to apples. Thank you guys for watching and listening again. I've been Ross Vacaturo, and I will see you next time on the Apples to Apples podcast. Peace.